Today in class, we will be discussing a major time in the United States history. Although many of you know the term Civil War, it is important to look at the event and look into the lives of those living in this time period and gain a perspective of other sub-events that were taking place. When looking at this time period, it is crucial to comprehend that there was many different categories of individuals throughout the United States, especially those from the down south. As you can see on the PowerPoint, there were those that escaped from slavery and then those that were enslaved. For those that were enslaved, it was important to note that there were individuals that did help them and risk their lives and families. An example given in your textbook is the Quakers that lived on the eastern shores. Those that had escaped from slavery were also called free blacks. Some things that those had escaped from slavery had this commonality that some believed that their life was easy, but in reality they were living in constant fear. Also, it was suspected during this time that those that had escaped from slavery were holding other fugitives. Also during this time, there was those who were enslaved, and this was primarily in the South. Most think of slavery associated with big cotton plantations, but it's important to recognize that there were enslaved people from small farms as well. Also, many think that the only form of farming on these farms were cotton, when in reality, in the lower South, different farms had different crops, such as some focus on tobacco, corn, and even sugarcane. Those that were enslaved were considered a piece of property, and this was constantly being reinforced with violence. This is key due to that there was a mindset that the masters and those that were slaves were never equal. When many people picture the time period of the Civil War, many picture whites down south that owned hundreds of slaves on a large plantation, when in reality, three-fourths of southern whites actually did not own slaves. With that being said, those that did have slaves, 88% of them only owned 20 or fewer, which is completely opposite to common belief. Also, typically people think farmers owned slaves when in reality there were multiple farmers who did not. For example, the yeoman farmers did not. The need and desire for slaves were merely connected with the concept of wanting and needing power to be a part of those privileged ranks, as well as feeling superior. This is just a glimpse of those that had escaped, were enslaved, and those that were white. I would highly suggest rereading through your text to learn more about these individuals. During this time period in 1787, there was an act of Congress of the Confederation of the United States that passed the Northwest Ordinance. This act is significant to know about due to that it was the first organized territory of the United States that was out of the region south of the Greater Lakes, which is north and west of the Ohio River and east of the Mississippi River. The Northwestern Ordinance also provided methods to admitting new states to the Union, as well as the Bill of Rights to territory. This ordinance also was so significant because it did have effects on banning slavery, such as establishing Michigan as a free state, which is an example of outlawing slavery in new territories. Also, it protected civil liberties. I will have a document on Blackboard about when Michigan became a free state for a refresher from past Michigan history. Also, another term used during this time period was sectionalism. This meaning is to show loyalty to the interest of one's own region or section of the country rather than to the country as a whole. This is typically connected with the 1800s through 1860s as the North was without slavery and industrialized, whereas the Deep South did concentrate on plantation agriculture. It has been debated by historians that the economic differences between the industrial North and the agricultural South contributed to the Civil War. Another term associated with this time period is nationalism. The term nationalism is typically associated with a strong identification of a group of individuals with a political entity defined in national terms. An example that pertains to this subject is that during the 1830s, the South had developed a strong sense of nationalism. During this time, the Southern nationalists were determined to get Southern-oriented educational institutes. The next term discussed throughout this time was federalism. Federalism is a political concept that is a group of members that are bonded together by a covenant with a governing representative, here. The federalism system is based on democratic rules. As a federalist system has power to govern is shared between national and state governments that creates a federalization. This term has seen more visible towards the end of the Civil War due to this was when the power shifted away from the states and overturned the national government. Although there was a shift in the powers towards the end of the Civil War, it is important to know about state power. The term states' rights is typically referred to political powers reserved for the United States government rather than the federal government. This term is important to keep in mind for future time span due to his sometimes is used as an opposition to federally mandated racial desegregation. So now that we are in between um, different time spaces of history with the pre-Civil War, the Civil War, and then we will be discussing Reconstruction and the post-war, my question for you is of the day is true or false, three-fourths of those living in the South did own slaves. Once again, three-fourths of those living in the South did own slaves. Is this true or false? Please write your answers on a piece of paper and pass it forward. This counts as extra credit. So take some time, think it over, and then once you're ready, pass it forward. We're going to keep going on pushing through this PowerPoint. It's important to understand when we typically talk about the Civil War, a lot of people know different aspects of it, and just to go over a brief summary of it, because there is more details in it within your actual textbook, and we'll go into an actual deeper lecture in the future. But the Civil War was fought between 1861 and 1865. The American Civil War was a result of decades of sectional tension between the North and the South. This focused on slavery and states' rights. These issues came to a head following the election of Abraham Lincoln in 1860. Over the next several months, 11 Southern states succeeded and formed the Confederate States of America. During the first 2 years of the war, Southern troops won numerous victories but saw their fortunes turn after losses at Gettysburg and Vicksburg in 1863. From then on, Northern forces worked to conquer the South, forcing them to surrender in April 1865. The roots of the Civil War can be traced to increasing differences between the North and the South, like previously stated, and they're growing um, differences within the 19th century had progressed. Chiefs among these issues were expansion of slavery into the territories, the South declining political power, states' rights, and the retention of slavery. Though these issues had existed for decades, they exploded in 1860 following the election of Abraham Lincoln, who was against the spread of slavery. As a result of his election, South Carolina, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, and Texas seceded from the Union. And once again, we'll go back over this within the future with more in depth, but as well keep up with your reading and you'll get more details within the Civil War. When looking at the actual battles of the Civil War, people sometimes do not recognize that there were African Americans who fought in the actual war. At the beginning of the war, black soldiers were turned away. By the end of the Civil War, it is estimated that 179,000 black men served as the U.S. Army and another 19,000 served in the Navy. Black soldiers served in artillery and infantry as well as performed non-combat support functions that sustain an army. During this time period, there were 80 black commissioned officers. African American women could not formally join the army, but did, however, serve as nurses, spies, and scouts. An example of this is Harriet Tubman. The key point in history that refers to the shift of the end of the Civil War is Reconstruction. This occurred when President Abraham Lincoln proposed a plan for Reconstruction. During the Reconstruction, blacks were able to earn their right to vote, and even though it was restricted, men, women, and children actively participated in political events. Also shown on the PowerPoint was the time that Freedmen's Bureau was introduced. Also during the Reconstruction, the government needed help from the North to survive. Eventually, all the rights the blacks had won during the Reconstruction were taken away by Southern whites, who regained control of the state's government. This was around the same time that restrictions kicked back into gear, and such as shown on the actual PowerPoint, racial segregation and black codes. Due to these changes occurring yet again, it is no surprise that during this time there was a resistance of Southern whites to change, like to actually challenge this. There was a time period that reaffirmed white supremacy, and there was tactics of intimidation and violence. An example given was the KKK, which targeted Republican leaders and also African Americans, which is interesting because many times most people think the KKK is just targeting African Americans. Also, the Force Act and the KKK Act enforced the 14th and 15th which we will be discussing shortly. The 13th Amendment. This is the first amendment that is connected with the time period and the Reconstruction Amendments. This amendment is significant due to it protects rights of native-born African Americans. It also prevented state government from denying citizenship to blacks born in the United States. Moving forward, we're now on to the 14th Amendment, which was also a part of the Reconstruction Amendments. And it is very significant to this time period because it is defined as a definition of what citizenship actually was, and it overruled the Dred Scott v. Sanford ruling by the Supreme Court that stated that blacks were actually not citizens of the United States. So this is very important because we still talk about this case to this day, and we'll even talk about it in the future. The 15th Amendment is the last Reconstruction Amendment, and it prohibits against discrimination against voters on basis of race or previous condition. And this is just significant because it's it's hard to see how often we do see amendments passed within our Constitution, and how important this was actually a shift and change of what our country was coming to and the challenges that were coming up ahead. So, due to the timing, we'll be picking up and reviewing on the amendments when we return to class. Have a great day. If you have any questions, please feel free to let me know, and I will have the works cited sent out to you as well. I have it on the original PowerPoint that is up online for you. And if you have any questions, please feel free to contact me. Thank you. Have a great day, guys.